Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today my guest is Dr. Steve Turley. Dr. Turley is the founder of Turley Talks, one of America's fastest growing alternative media outlets, providing an optimistic and scholarly perspective on current events and cultural trends by constructing a parallel economy to live out our God-given freedoms. He's known as the Patriot Professor. He's written on a number of topics that I think our audience would love. But one piece of material I want to point out is Classical versus Modern Education, a Vision from C.S. Lewis. You can see his entire bio in the show notes. But Dr. Turley, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Robert. It's great to be here with you.
Now, if someone comes to, I know I've seen your show on YouTube, the Turley Talks. What is Turley Talks all about?
Yeah, it's I really try to analyze current events in light of what I see as the rise of what I call a new conservative age or civilizationalist world. A lot of conservatives often feel despondent and despairing. They think the world's falling apart, the sky is falling and the like. And to a certain extent it is. We're going through a crazy paradigm shift, massive tectonic paradigm shift right now. But ironically, that paradigm shift is going to be moving more and more in our direction, in directions of values and so forth, and institutions that we would, I think, hold dear. And so what I try to do is try to give people hope in the midst of these crazy and turbulent times, as I call them. And then with that hope, give them courage to live faithfully in such a time as this.
Yeah, and you do daily videos, letting people know what's going on, how we should kind of look at it maybe from a different perspective than you're going to see on mainstream media. But I mean, with that comes consequences because big media wants to protect each other. I know a lot of people call it the uniparty, or it's Fox News and CNN, really just the same side of same coin, different sides. Have you been deplatformed, or what are the challenges of getting alternative perspectives out there that might not fit the regime narrative?
Yeah, well, we have, unfortunately. Yeah, we did get demonetized several months back. We're a news and current events site, and so we were posting videos from around the world, but without commentary. Not all the time. Normally, I'm giving commentary, but every once in a while, we'd put videos up without commentary, and YouTube did not like that. So they just out of the blue, they just shut down our monetization on Black Friday of all days too, just to screw in the back a little stronger there. But we have a lot of sponsors and subscribers, monthly subscribers who are our core, our foundation. So that's been such a blessing here. In terms of the way news works today, I think we have to understand it as part of just the larger challenges that we're facing in an increasingly technological and centralized society. Joel Kotkin of Chapman University refers to the world we're living in as refeudalization. And it's an interesting term because it refers to the ways in which the structure of our society increasingly reflects the kind of social structure that characterized the feudal Middle Ages. So, for example, today, like then, you've got an astonishing concentration of wealth and power in the hands of very, very few people. So 5 years ago, about 400 billionaires own half of the world's assets. Today, that number's dropped to just 100 billionaires. And again, that's just in 5 years. So you have this tremendous concentration of wealth and power where bureaucrats and billionaires are teaming up to create this sort of top-down governance structure. And next to that, we're seeing today the rise of a comparable kind of religious fundamentalism. But of course, today, our fundamentalism is secular wokeness with, issues of environment and gender and race and sexuality. But the key here is that, like with religious fundamentalism of old, there's no room for dissent. dissenters are heretics. And instead of a clerical class enforcing the new dogma, we have a clerisy class, a class of pseudo-intellectuals from the universities and professions, the credentialed class, that are imposing an ideological inquisition really on the whole of the population. And I would argue the purpose of that is to hollow us out morally. And they do it not just by having us question what a woman is, but also by getting rid of the mediating institutions like church and family and community, so that we end up becoming solely consumers. And as long as we're just consumers, then we will forever enrich the billionaires and the bureaucrats. So it functions as this massive loop in the system. And within that context, the media, being very much part of that billionaire class with corporate structure, CEOs on top. Jeff Bezos, for example, owning Washington Post, and Rupert Murdoch owning Fox and the like. They practice more and more what's called advocacy journalism. And that's where you have media outlets just blatantly, openly shilling for the establishment and for partisan issues. And what they do is then they squeeze and manipulate what they call facts into this sort of woke advocacy. And so they're inevitably guilty of confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is just simply when you deliberately reconfigure information data specifically to support your prior beliefs and values. So it's basically a kangaroo court. But the good news is more and more people see that the information they're getting from the legacy media, they don't see it as any more trustworthy than, the scientific data that was coming out of Philip Morris, Marlboro cigarettes, right? They see the kangaroo court and the like. And so what that's doing is it's opening up space now for independent content creators like myself, who will analyze the news and events of the day from a perspective or a paradigm that the legacy media is effectively shut out. And then that's what that's doing now, is it's giving people a whole new way of understanding the world. And then it's creating communities of knowledges where knowledge is no longer this one size fits all, thus saith the scientist perspective. Now it's opening up into what are called ecologies of knowledges, where now communities of knowledge can come together and really create culture from that. And then the more pluralistic the culture is, ironically, the more civilizationalist our society becomes. So I think it's just I would see as sort of the big picture of where we're in and the amazing opportunities that we have in the midst of some very formidable challenges.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this idea of feudalism, because I kind of felt in just thinking that, are we going back to more feudalistic society? It's kind of a theory that I've not really had a lot of discussion on, but this idea of like crony capitalism. Obviously, you've kind of got these captured markets where, big corporations are basically given by the government a monopoly. And you've got these kind of this idea of a parallel economy being developed among the conservatives, because we just see like this, corporate woke ideology being pressed on us from all sides because of just this kind of hive mind the upper echelon of money has in the United States. So my question is have they swung too far? Like, it seems like you mentioned earlier that's maybe coming back our direction. Are they just doubling down because this is the only thing they know? Or just normal Americans now, it seems like, understand that CNN is just propaganda, Fox News is propaganda, MSNBC is propaganda, and they've just overplayed their hand? Or do you think that we've still got some pain to go until more people wake up?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of both there. Yeah. They've clearly overplayed their hand. There's no question there. When you look at the latest Gallup poll, for example, their latest poll on Americans' confidence in the news media as reliable mediators of information, I mean, the results were pretty staggering. Nearly 60% of those surveyed, 58% to be exact, have little or no trust at all in the legacy media. That's an astonishing number. We've never seen that before. This is such a far break when 70-80% of the public did trust Walter Cronkite. They trusted CBS, NBC, ABC, New York Times, Washington Post. Now we're talking 6 in 10 Americans not having any confidence really at all in the legacy media. It's an astonishing fall, and it's just falling more and more each and every day. And so, but that's also working in conjunction with the new kind of society we're living in today. You know, the legacy media came to the fore in the 19th century during something known as mass society. And mass society is when our society became very urbanized. So at the beginning of the 19th century, 90% of the American population were rural. But at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, 90% were now urban. So there was this massive shift to the urban, to the cosmopolitan, to the coastal cities and so forth. And that's where you began to see the emergence of our legacy media. New York Times, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, right? Philadelphia Inquirer, and Baltimore Sun. We could go on, right? Boston Herald. And so news shifted away from the rural to the cosmopolitan, to the liberal, much more left-wing sentiment and sensibilities. What's so fascinating is we're living in a very different society today. We're moving away from mass society, and we're moving towards what's called the network society. You and I are experiencing it right now, where more and more of our social interaction is basically done online. And this is radically changing the way we even just think of social order. Because if you think about back in the day in mass society, my whole sense of career, my whole sense of self was understood by virtue of our proximity to one another. So if I wanted to get into country music, I'd have to move to Nashville, right? Or if I wanted to get into gambling, I'd have to move to Vegas. Or if I wanted to get into finance, I'd have to move to Wall Street. Whereas today in the network society, you know, you have someone like Oliver Anthony, who was just this, you know, this Appalachian hit, musical hit. Nobody discovered him because he went to Nashville. As a matter of fact, they discovered him in his backyard barn in Virginia, and in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The reason why we discovered him is because he had a webcam and a computer, and he was able to just load up his. One of the coolest bands out there that a lot of people know, of course, is Journey. They've been they're about 40 years old now. And they had this amazing singer. I think his name was Steve Perry, if I recall. Incredible singer. But he left the band, and they didn't know what on earth to do. How are they going to replace a guy like this? And all of a sudden, somebody sent him a link to a YouTube video of this Filipino guy who was a Journey singer. He could sound just like Steve Perry. And he was as dirt poor. They flew him over, and now, of course, he's this gazillionaire rock star because they found him through the network society. And so what the network society is doing now is it's giving us instant digital access to information that's bypassing the legacy media that used to have a monopoly over information dissemination. It's bypassing the legacy media in many ways, like texting and email bypassed the post office. So we still use the post office, but nowhere near what we used to. We still use the legacy media, but nowhere near what we used to. And so the world is just dramatically changing away from the legacy media. So even if they were still totally honest and they were really trying to be objective reporters in the understanding state of affairs, if that were the case, I don't think it would have anywhere near the confidence it used to have, just because now everybody with a cell phone is a cameraman. You take any event, any major event in the world today, the very first footage that we're seeing is not from some satellite truck that was listening to the police monitors that drove out there 15 minutes after things. It's coming from people with smartphones. Everybody with a smartphone is a cameraman. Everyone with a social media account's a commentator. And so now this is where corroboration comes in. That becomes a very key component of critical thinking. Is you can't just take what's out there as factual. You're going to have to corroborate. You're going to have to be able to cross-pollinate this information with another independent source to see the extent to which the data lines up. And if the data does line up from two or more independent sources, then chances are you've got something there. So that's kind of the world that we're moving more and more into.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of see the network effect with those who are into crypto and these meme coins that take off.
That's right.
It's just,
That's right.
There's no actual value underneath it, but just shows you the power really of networks. And if you can, utilize that power for good, it's, a net benefit for the world. And if you use it for not good, well, then you can cause a lot of harm to a lot of people. Some of these historical or legacy networks have a lot of resiliency. I mean, I think about like Facebook when they were really squashing conservatives, and our Facebook page just, visits dropped like 30 or 40% overnight. And then 3 days later, right back to normal.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bud Light, really debacle, and, people stopped buying it. That's one of the few kind of things that actually worked out. Target dropped in value after some of those things, but they seem to have, rebounded relatively back. So how do we create not just a parallel economy, but get people to change their behaviors? Because I think that's, whether it's like the Truth Network or Twitter or now X, I mean, it's very hard to get people to the next level. So what have you seen that works for you, or how are you really addressing getting people to your channel versus to these other legacy medias? Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think it fits into what's called consumer politics, which is just happening quite organically. You mentioned Bud Light. We can ask Bud Light what they think of consumer politics, right? Just this an increasingly natural propensity to boycott and to boycott. So it's both a negative and a positive. It's refusing to buy from companies that offend values and deliberately going out and maybe even going out of your way to buy from companies that support and defend your values. So I think that's kind of baked into the cake of the network society today, because we are in this very strange kind of refeudalized world. We are also, in that sense, creating our own online communities, our own communities of practice, and like you and I are doing it right now. And the basic principle for the community formation tends to be values and the common value sharing. So what we're doing really is, I think, an extension of what scholars call constructive resistance. What's interesting is there's a whole field of study in the academy known as resistance studies, for those interested in that kind of thing. But in the field, a parallel economy or even a parallel civilization is really considered part of what's known as constructive resistance. And that just involves building a society in the present that we desire independently of the dominant structures that are already in place. So, for example, when Catholics first started coming to the States in the 19th century, right, they saw the dominant education structures as primarily Protestant. And interestingly enough, because of the Lord's Prayer, because when they would recite the Lord's Prayer, they would say, "For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever." And Catholics, that was the priest is supposed to say that. So they always thought like, oh, that's Protestant. So they began constructing their own schools to, in effect, resist those Protestant tendencies and maintain their Catholic identity. And then 100 years later, conservative evangelicals who were outnumbering liberal mainliners, largely because of the baby boom of the 1960s, when secular liberals started fully embracing contraception and the sexual revolution, and they stopped having children, whereas conservative evangelicals were having more children than ever. And that's sort of the precursor to the Reagan era and the moral majority Christian coalition. But prior to that, they found the education in the 70s and 80s reflected more secularized vision of America. So conservative evangelicals began homeschooling in the 70s. And then, of course, we saw the building of classical schools in the 80s. And these efforts are referred to in the literature as basically infrastructures of resistance, in that they create in the present the kind of structures that we're hoping for in the future. But what's so interesting is that's sort of the pattern. There is a Field of Dreams kind of pattern there. You build it, and then people come to it. So there's a long-standing tradition among those who are very interested in a very particular vision of society that's at odds with the dominant vision. So the original feudal society that we experienced in the medieval period got blown apart by the Protestant Reformation, which in many ways was a populist revolt, for lack of a better term, if we wanted to kind of restructure that way. And one of the things that they did was to begin building their own structures, particularly reconfiguring the universities, reconfiguring churches, you name it. It's very interesting that Catholic churches, when Protestants took them over, they rearranged them around Protestant sentiment. So Catholic churches are more longitudinal. So you go in from the back, from the narthex, and you go towards the front, and the movement is towards the where the Eucharist is, where the Mass is celebrated at the altar in the sanctuary at the very front. Whereas what Protestants tended to do was they would actually make it more horizontal, and they would put the pulpit kind of in the center of that long lengthwise movement, reconfigure the pews to going around the pulpit so as to emphasize teaching, you see. So you begin to see, even within the structure of the church, a parallel-like structure emerging there in accordance with these Protestant sentiments that were blowing this feudalist society apart. You see it with Mahatma Gandhi. He did something like this when he promoted the refusal to buy imported cloth and textiles from Britain. And instead, he initiated spinning and weaving businesses and practices in Indian villages to promote Indian independence and self-sufficiency, even in the midst of British colonialism. So they got to actually live the approximate of a post-colonial life in the midst of British colonialism. You saw something like that with blacks here in the States, where they started their own taxi services so as to effectively boycott the segregating busing in a number of states. This is a parallel economy. It's the building of infrastructures of resistance so as to be able to live in the present in light of a hoped-for future. And once those structures are in place, then they provide a platform for more and more people to come in, participate, and to make that future a reality.
Why don't you take a trip to the Great Wolf Lodge? And it has locations around the nation. It's family friendly. It's complete with suite style rooms, plenty of entertainment, water parks, and many more attractions your family can enjoy. And the best part is that you get a discount code by listening to my show. And you can go to greatwolf.com, type in the code CLAS432A at checkout to get up to 30% off. Of course, you can find that code in the show notes, but there are locations near you. Just head to Great Wolf Lodge's website at greatwolf.com and type in that code CLAS432A and get up to 30% off for your family. So we'll see you there. Now, the establishment can't like these things, so how do we make those parallel structures and networks more resilient? And how historically have these parallel structures, maybe the ones that didn't work out, or how have we seen them attack them so that they get destroyed or,
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, you certainly saw it in the 70s where the term, as I understand, parallel economy actually comes from a even more interesting term called parallel polis. We get the word Indianapolis polis or Annapolis from it, meaning city-state. And it came from these Czechoslovakian dissidents, Václav Havel, Václav Benda. And during the Soviet period in Eastern Europe, back when Czechoslovakia was a single country, they tried to do what they could to reform the political structures, but to no avail. Moscow wasn't allowing that. And so they decided to begin to build what they called a parallel public or a parallel polis. And the idea there was to try to forge alternative institutions so as to be able to enable people to live out truth. And the extent to which people could live out truth in these alternative institutions, they would have the comparable effect of exposing the dominant institutions to be what they have become, which is a big fat lie. So of course, they got cracked down big time. But the more it had this opposite effect. The more they got cracked down on, the more they expose the dominant institutions to be the tyrannical lies that they are. And so, again, very similar to what you saw in the civil rights movement in the 60s, where the more segregationist authorities cracked down on it, the more they actually ended up revealing its truth. So it has a certain built-in resilience to it, but just like the church is built on the seed of the blood of the martyrs. It has this built-in kind of resilience to it, that the more the powers that be try to destroy it, the more they actually reveal these parallel institutions to be the truth that they are, to be a place where one can live out an authentic self over and against institutions of domination and power. And so I think that's key for us. I think the key for us is to be able to live out our lives authentically. And also, a neat part of this as well is part of that is, and I just kind of alluded to it, a part of that is that we're actually, by living out an authentic sense of faith, family, and freedom, we're actually going through a bit of a baby boom within a demographic bust that's happened all over the West. So I get a little impatient with some of these demographic studies that talk about how the West is fading. And I get impatient because, yes, as an aggregate, Western populations are consistently below the 2.1 replacement level on children. But when you break down those populations, you'll find that inside those populations, there are demographics that are absolutely populationally exploding. Amish double every 20 years. I mean, let that hit you. The Amish double every 20 years. And I promise you, it's not because of converts, right? LDS, Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, grow about by 40% every 20 years. Evangelicals consistently have a 40% fertility advantage over secular liberals. And we're seeing that work itself out politically. So Trump won in states that have on average a 20% fertility advantage over the states that Hillary and that Biden won. So what we're seeing over time is just by living out our faith faithfully, we're actually, and as a secular world is living out its faith faithfully, not having kids anymore.
Right.
What we're seeing is a dramatic demographic, a true replacement that's happening, but it's actually liberals getting replaced more and more by Christian conservatives.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I've said is that we just need to wait 2 generations, that as long as we educate our children in the way they should go, that we're winning the, culture war by having babies, getting married, staying married, not necessarily in that order, getting married, having babies, staying married, having more kids, that those of us who actually have Western values as a part of our family continue to grow, and that we really just need to keep the secularists away from our children and to continue to build. One of the things that I think that modern progressives and modern establishment has figured out, that violence isn't the answer for them to get their ways, that they've seen that through the revolutions, And so now I believe they're trying to subsidize and buy these parallel economies to eventually take them over by adding strings, not at first, but over a series of years and decades so that they get sucked into the system. One of the things that I know you've talked about and people, sometimes maybe think it's, conspiracy theories, but this idea of a great reset, there's this idea
Oh,
of
yeah.
15-minute cities.
Yes.
You have a book on it, I think, or download 5 Steps to Escape the Great Reset. But it's this idea of you'll own nothing and you'll love it, or you'll like it, I think is the quote, although the people say that
You'll
that was
be
misquoted.
happy, right?
That's
You'll own
not
nothing
right.
and you'll be happy. That's right.
And they're, see, like, look at these parallels that are in the Bible. Jesus said, sell all your stuff. And, two different outcomes that they were going for.
That's right.
But how is the Great Reset being played out here in America? Then how can we make sure that we're not getting sucked into these ideas? Because, a lot of these ideas sound good. 15-minute city, can walk everywhere.
Right.
Don't have to worry about, safety, all these type of things. So
Right.
how do we inoculate ourselves and our family against some of these ideas that might sound good that are coming out of big globalists?
Yeah, Bigelow, Davos, and the like. Yeah. Well, right. Well, the interesting thing with the Great Reset is there's actually been a lot of critical research on the Great Reset in the academy. Hillsdale College actually has a very, very good lecture series on the Great Reset. So yes, there's a lot of sensationalism involved with this term and phrase, or conspiracy theories and the like. But no, you could be sure. You could go and look it up. It is something that actually is. It's a title of a book written by Klaus Schwab and his associate Terry Mullerat that was published back in 2020. Very strangely, the year COVID broke out. And what's so interesting is that the content of the book can actually be traced back much farther than 2020. It actually goes back to Klaus Schwab's. He's the president of the World Economic Forum that meets in Davos, Switzerland every year. But when he was just sort of an obscure economist back in the 1990s, he wrote a book called Modern Enterprise Management. You can still get it today on Amazon. But that's where he introduced the very key concept for him and for his paradigm, and what we found out for this kind of neo-feudalized paradigm here in the United States. It's a concept known as stakeholder capitalism. And that's the key. If you want to know what the Great Reset is, it comes down to this notion of stakeholder capitalism. And what stakeholder capitalism it's generally presented, if you look it up on Wikipedia or Investopedia or something like that, it's just presented as a system in which corporations are they're reimagined as entities that serve the interests of the general population at large. It's not just their investors, right? It's not just their stockholders. We're all stakeholders in a better world, right? So the notion is that corporations are there to serve society, specifically to serve a more fair, equitable, and sustainable society. And so stakeholder capitalism involves deliberately instituting what's called ESG. We often refer to it as DEI here, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's basically the same thing. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance criteria. And these are, well, actually, technically, there's scores that corporations get in relation to those key areas so that investors can show that they're investing in companies that basically advance social justice goals that are very, very left wing. So we're talking green energy, we're talking abortion access, transgender rights, things, racial equity, you name it. So it's basically the attempt to pressure companies to become more and more woke. And this is where the billionaires and bureaucrats come together. Sort of the evil genius of this program is that what it basically does is it deputizes corporations to do what politicians know they could never do because they'd never get elected to do it. People would push back against them in the elections. And so what corporations do is they basically enforce this ESG onto consumers. Many have drawn a analogy to China's social credit system. China's social credit system is a technocratic project that really seeks to control human behavior so as to, well, they'll say to maximize safety and sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you'll own nothing, but you'll be happy. So it's now widely recognized that the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is sort of the key global organization that's actively designing and seeking to implement the architecture of just such an internationalized social credit system, all really in the end, all in the name of very radical, apocalyptic environmentalism. That's really key. If you want to understand George Soros and what he's doing today, he's become extremely apocalyptic environmentalist over the last couple of decades. And what that means is, as far as these elites are concerned, these billionaires and these bureaucrats, the environment is the ultimate stakeholder. That's what's so important to get here, is that the apocalyptic environmentalism, which is so foundational to their worldview, means that the world's safety, the world's sustainability can no longer be trusted to the consent of the governed. Because as we saw with Brexit and with Trump in 2016, the consent of the governed can be easily duped and manipulated and swayed away from what's most important for our planet. And so what the WEF then is all about really is controlling what's called our life chances. That's the technical term for it. And life chances involves your access to basic material conditions: employment, education opportunities, banking, finances. And so all of these things, in the name of stakeholder capitalism, are seen as legitimate objects of control, precisely because all of these things in some way, shape, or form affect the ecology and the environment. And if we don't control your life chances, you run the very real risk of ending life on this planet as we know it. That's the apocalyptic environmentalism. So they literally believe they're saving the world by basically controlling you, controlling you in everything that you do. And it all goes back to this notion of stakeholder capitalism, because it's not just governments doing it. It's big business is every bit as dangerous as big government. So we wrote, so that's the problem. That's the issue. And you see how that overlaps literally perfectly with sort of this refeudalized structure of the world. It's just looking at the same thing from two different vantage points. And so we wrote a ebook called How to Escape the Great Reset, which looks at how to tap into this burgeoning parallel economy that's happening really quite literally all over the world. I mean, even regardless of what people think about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, but one of the things that Russia ended up doing is building an entirely parallel economy to withstand Western sanctions. So it's turned eastward, and it's helped to form BRICS. That's been in the works for about 20 years, but that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They've just incorporated a bunch of OPEC nations in there, so they're technically called BRICS Plus, and that's a parallel society to the G7, so that the G7 can no longer sanction Russia effectively anymore. Russia's actually economically booming from what we're seeing today, and it's largely because they built this parallel economy. Again, for right or for wrong, I'm not getting into the politics of just the descriptive of what's happening, not prescriptive, but descriptive of what's happening there. So we're tapping into a parallel economy is really an international affair that goes way beyond just, alternative payment processors and the like. I mean, I know you talk a lot about crypto and everything. We're talking about literally a parallel civilization that's happening that goes all over the world, that's rendering, even the New York Times has admitted it, it's really rendering the dreams of the WEF futile. The world has changed too much, and the globalist unipolar world that they relied on since, they were starting in the 1970s, but since 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, where they really saw this vision of stakeholder capitalism being the single one-size-fits-all political economy throughout the world. Even the New York Times saying those days are over. A new world is rising, and the WEF doesn't have much of a stake in this world anymore.
Well, that's good to hear. And I know we've got a big election later this year, and that will give an opportunity for Americans to elect some good leaders and some bad ones probably, and we'll see what happens. But I think both of us would agree that you've got to get involved.
Yes.
Now, not just politically, but with the parallel economy and establishing those networks so that you yourself and your family are resilient to really whatever happens next, and that chasing fiat dollars may or may not be your best bet going forward. So keep getting married, having babies, and we win the future by following our biblical mandate. So
that's right.
So where do our listeners, I've really enjoyed this conversation. How can they connect with you? What's the website, YouTube, social media? Give us all the good things.
Oh, thanks, Robert. Yeah, you could just go to YouTube channel. It's just Dr. Steve Turley. My name, same with Rumble. We're on all the different social media, Facebook, you name it. And then if you want to go and see our daily website, it's Turley Talks, my last name, Turley Talks, like TED Talks.com, all one word, lowercase.
All right. Well, you can check out all those links in the show notes. And Dr. Turley, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.
Wow. We need to get this information out to more people to help them understand what's going on in the world around us. So please share this episode with a friend. Go check out Dr. Turley's website and his YouTube page so you can continue to educate yourself, create a more resilient family, and get engaged in the parallel economy. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.